Hey, good morning, classes. It is Friday, April 3rd. Not too much to do as far as the workload goes. Just have a short 8 question quiz that I would encourage you to do after taking a look at this. But I did want to go over some of those perspective photos that I gave you, I believe on Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't know. I lose track of the days now. But anyway, just to go over some of those. So bear with me here. Perspective, I gave you the definition here, the idea. Sometimes people shorten the definition to the idea of point of view, which I think is fair to do. But this one says a particular way of viewing things that depends on one's experience and personality. So just the idea that um, when you look at the Revolutionary War, obviously the British are going to have a different perspective than the Americans, and the Patriots are going to have a different perspective than the Loyalists. But it doesn't even have to be to such strong degrees. It could be, whether you're male or female, whether you're young or old, whether you're rich or poor. All of these things factor into people's perspective. So, as I said in this question number one, just because you live in the same place as someone, well, that doesn't mean that you're going to share the same perspective. Just because you're the same age as someone, that doesn't mean you're going to share the same perspective. It actually goes into a little bit of what we talked about way back with James Madison and the tyranny of the majority, that if you embrace people's differences, that you won't have the tyranny of the majority. Well, this is similar. The idea that we are all unique, so therefore no two people have the same perspective on historical events. And then I just want to give you some photos. Some are a little bit shocking, some are questionable. So this one from the 1930s, when these cages came in vogue, and you can find all kinds of pictures like this on if you do a Google image search. But the idea of, like, is this child abuse? Or but you also have to think, like, well, people try to. I mean, this comes from a good place, and we might look at it with quizzically, but the idea of, like, having your child get fresh air. Keep in mind the 1930s. Maybe the roads and sidewalks weren't as clean. Maybe there wasn't access to public parks. Maybe the traffic laws made walking on the streets a little bit more dangerous than they are now. So if someone is willing to take this opportunity to give their kid access to fresh air, then maybe these are people who are who care very much for their children. But it does certainly look strange. The optics of it, as we might say, are not good. Um, this one is a really fascinating photo. It's from 1967, running the Boston Marathon. Now, personally, if anybody wants to run 26.2 miles, I am not going to stop them. I just ask that they don't ask me to come along. But this woman right here, Kathy Schweitzer, she had been this is actually her college track coach right here at Kent State. And this is her boyfriend at the time, who became her husband, who became her ex-husband, who was running alongside her. They're about 7 miles in, I believe, when the race organizer, I forget his name, I think he's since passed away, he attempted to physically stop her from on this run. So just so many interesting perspectives here, because you have the perspective of the boyfriend, of her, of course, of this guy who feels the need um, to support this rule, even though, what are you actually supporting? This her coach, who's known her for a number of years, and then just, like, these other runners who must be so focused on finishing the race and what they must be thinking. And then one of my favorites is this guy right here, and even though he's kind of blurry. He might see this picture in the newspaper the next day, and he's smiling like a goofball, but having no idea what's going on behind him. So thankfully, obviously, women can run the Boston Marathon. But keep in mind, this was 1967. The female marathon race did not become an Olympic sport until 1984. So women running marathons is actually something very new in American history. This one, just to give you a map and a graph that shows how people feel about their own state. I mean, I don't know how many take. It's not super scientific, but I just thought it was kind of interesting how states like New Mexico and Colorado, which are right next to each other, there is such a delta between how people feel about where they are, or between Illinois and Wisconsin, or even between Texas and Louisiana. But if people psychologically are not thinking that where they are is a good place, whether physically or mentally or spiritually or whatever, then I can see that probably being a net negative, and what's the secret? What is it about Montana where the people there think that their state is one of the best? What's their secret? This one, a lot of interesting responses to this, but King Tut's tomb. And as it said, there was an archaeologist, a British archaeologist, 1922, who finally opened it. But again, just the different. You look at this and you think, we know a lot about King Tut, the boy king, and you probably in sixth grade talked about him. His some of the things taken from his tomb are very famous, and we know a lot more about Egyptian culture. But should those things have been taken? Maybe that's a question that we don't necessarily ask because, if this was sealed, granted not sealed with the master lock, but if this was as sealed as it could be back then by the Egyptians, then who were the people in 1922 to decide this shouldn't be unsealed anymore, right? If a casket or a crypt has been sealed for 10 years, or 5 years, people wouldn't go back in. But why, if it's been sealed for thousands of years, does it make it okay? Not necessarily saying I agree one way or the other, but I do think it's at least interesting to realize different people's perspective about, what one man's archaeologist, another person's grave robber, I guess is the point I'm making. Um, this photo, which in the caption gives you a little bit of detail about, from 2004. So there was a ban from the Bush administration about these American flag draped caskets. So a non-military person took this, a contractor, as this plane is going from Kuwait um, to an Air Force base in Delaware. Um, and photos like this were banned, but ended up appearing on the Seattle Times. And again, one of those things where I think you can understand arguments of both sides that this is disrespectful to perhaps the military families. Many people would be uncomfortable seeing this image, but also the idea of, well, Americans also need to know that wars we engage in have consequences, and to see that, hey, there are 20 caskets here, and those are 20 American soldiers who lie within them, and to understand that a war just isn't something, especially the Iraq War, from when you guys were not quite born yet or just babies. There are consequences to this. It's not just something that takes place 12,000 miles away. These are real lives that are affected. And then probably the best known image of all, this one, Migrant Mother, which I know that Miss Booth has some prints of this that she uses in art class. Um, but a very powerful image, and one of the more famous photographs that we have during the Great Depression. And this mother, Florence Thompson from Oklahoma, in just there's actually several pictures taken on the same sort of same situation. This was the one that became the most famous. But it's interesting to read her bio. She actually lived to be 80 years old, Florence Thompson. And but to have these 10 kids, and I think at the time she's like 33 years old, and she has 7 kids, and her first husband died, moved from Oklahoma, and just the worry on her face, and just what she had to go through with her children, and the perspective there is one that is difficult for us to appreciate, but we can try the best that we can. So anyway, just some few things about perspective, and understanding that when we look at historical events, it's to acknowledge that there are more than one way to look at things. All right. So that said, good luck on the quiz today, and I will check back in with some new stuff on Monday. So have a good weekend. Hopefully the rain will stop and you guys will have some fun things to do. Thanks.